Hello folks, we're now less than 2 weeks away from the Midnight pre-patch, which is when the new add-on restrictions will be kicking in. Yes, really it is that soon. Now we older hands at World of Warcraft are of course used to logging in at the start of a pre-patch to find our user interface a hot mess until we update our add-ons. And of course we usually also have to deal with a couple of busted add-ons until they eventually get updated a few days later, or we give in and remove those ones that have obviously been abandoned by their authors. But this time around, things are going to be a bit different, with some really big add-ons going away and many more losing important functionality. That's important to us, of course. So if you don't want to make do with the default user interface on pre-patch day, which is a valid option for sure, you may already be thinking about what you need to do to prepare. And if that's the case, this guide is for you, as I'm going to be running through how I'm personally preparing for pre-patch day. Now, if you're an add-on-aholic like me, then you'll likely have far too many add-ons installed to keep them all in your head. If that's not the case, then I do commend your restraint, and you may well be able to skip my first step. But for the rest of us, in the run-up to a new expansion, I always like to do a little bit of a mini audit of all of my add-ons. Now, what I mean by an audit is I run through my current set of add-ons and basically categorize them by how important they are. Now, the categories I use are essential, which are those add-ons that I'd really be upset not to have on launch day. Important, which are add-ons that I'd definitely miss, but I'd be okay doing without for a week or two. And optional, which are those add-ons that I use only infrequently or which are only situationally useful. In addition to that, I have 3 other categories, 2 of which are going to be relevant for my next step. The first of those categories, the War Within, are add-ons which are targeting specific expansion features and which I won't be needing in the next expansion. And the other category I call To Delete, which is pretty self-explanatory. Those are the add-ons that I don't actually use or need anymore. Now, normally that War Within category would just be things like perhaps a Horrific Visions add-on, but this time around it's going to be a bit bigger, as it's going to need to include the likely casualties of the add-on lockdown. Now, figuring out exactly what add-ons are going to be going away isn't as straightforward as you might think. One of the things that's been most surprising about how the add-on lockdown is playing out in practice is how few add-ons have actually announced that they are shutting down. I have seen a ton of predictions, even recently, about the demise of things like Plater, Details and Cell, to name just a few. But those particular add-ons have all been confirmed by the authors as survivors. So when you do go through and try and figure out what add-ons are going away, don't blindly assume that any add-on is going away without at least checking to make sure. That said, there are still a few add-ons that we do know for sure won't be making the cut, the most prominent of which is Weak Orders. Beyond that though, the only other add-ons that I know of which are publicly confirmed their shutdown is Hikili, the rotational helper add-on, and GTFO, which warns you whenever you stand in fire. Those particular add-ons that are going away do give us some clues about what else might be very likely not to make it into Midnight. Probably the most surefire examples are going to be other rotational helpers like Hero Rotation, Canro, and I'm sure there's many other out there. I don't really see how those particular add-ons can continue to work, other than as perhaps a cosmetic skin for the built-in rotational helper and one button assistant. The other popular add-on that I strongly suspect might end up not making the cut is Omni CD. One of Blizzard's earliest interviews about the add-on lockdown specifically called out that they did not want us to be able to track group members' cooldowns via add-ons, and I think it is very likely that certain PvP add-ons that also track group and opponent CDs and trinkets could also be casualties. Examples including things like Gladius and perhaps battleground enemies. And a final add-on to mention on the PvP front is the World PvP add-on Spy. This uses the in-game combat log to detect enemy players using abilities nearby, and that in-game combat log has been completely blocked to all add-ons. On the subject of which add-ons I think are very likely to survive, surprisingly, nameplate and unit frame add-ons are going to be fine, as will action bar add-ons. And of course, things like DBM and bigwigs are already confirmed to be supporting Midnight. But it is worth being aware that supporting Midnight doesn't necessarily mean that those add-ons are completely unscathed. Many of those examples will be losing quite a big chunk of the functionality that you're already used to. For example, the ability to rename taskbar abilities from things like Midnight Annihilation to just Frontal isn't going to exist at all in Midnight, nor will add-ons like Cell be able to tell healers exactly what to dispel and when. For the most part, combat-focused add-ons will be very strictly limited to just what the built-in user interface equivalents can do, and not much more, though there are a few notable exceptions. For example, while Plater's ability to fully customize nameplate colours based on the name of the NPC is no more, nameplate add-ons will still be able to highlight things like casters and lieutenant mobs using color coding. All of this means that beyond those few add-ons who have confirmed their retirement, it can be pretty difficult to know exactly what you might end up losing. And if that's not enough, there is a good chance that some perfectly viable add-ons may not be ready for use on day one of the pre-patch. For example, LVI has confirmed that they will for sure be supporting Midnight, but at the same time, when the developers are asked if they'll be ready for the pre-patch launch, they're very reluctant to commit. And that is quite understandable. The sheer size and scale of LVI means that they do have a bit of a mountain to climb in order to get it all ready in time. Now, what all that means in practice for my attempts to categorize add-ons is that I've had to add an extra category at risk, which is for those add-ons that I do want to keep around and which I'm genuinely unsure if I'll actually be able to use them either at the pre-patch launch or perhaps even at all in Midnight. And that category is going to be relevant for my step 3. But for now, let's get back to step 2, which is to clean up. The last thing that you're going to need in pre-patch day is to have to deal with a bunch of extra add-ons that you don't actually need or use, especially if those add-ons turn out to be broken. So once you've finished figuring out what add-ons you have and how important they are to you, the next thing is to get in and start removing those add-ons that you don't need, because for sure, the fewer add-ons you actually have, the much easier it is going to be to get up and running on pre-patch day. Now, step 3 is figuring out alternative to all of those essential and important add-ons that you're worried might not be available at the start of the pre-patch. Now, talking straight up, the path of least resistance is to just prepare to make do with the default user interface. The user interface went through some major improvements for the launch of Dragonflight, and those have now been supplemented by the addition of some useful new features, including the cooldown manager, a built-in damage meter, and even a built-in version of a boss mod. Now, for sure, those changes are not to everyone's taste, but there are plenty of people now who play at a very high level in the War Within with next to no add-ons, and Taliesin of Taliesin and Evitel fame even did an experiment back in Season 1 of the War Within, where he got all 3 roles to Keystone Hero with just the default user interface. But if that's really not for you, then for sure now is the time to try to figure out if and how you will replace any of those missing weak orders, along with a contingency plan if your favourite user interface mods just aren't ready on time. There are no one-size-fits-all solutions for this, so I can only talk you through my personal plans. Now, for the class head-up display, the built-in cooldown manager is basically now the only game in town, but thankfully, new add-ons have emerged that are making great strides in customising and extending it. And there are a few dedicated cooldown manager add-ons out there, but at the same time, many of the broader user interface replacement add-ons have also been doing some great work. And that is going to include Elf UI, which already has an unfinished cooldown manager skin on its beta version. Looking beyond wee corners, and my other main area of concern is the readiness of Elf UI. Now, to be clear, I'm still very hopeful that it will be somewhat ready enough to use for pre-patch. But given the size and complexity, that is not guaranteed. So this is where I am preparing a contingency plan, which is going to be a combination of two new add-ons called NefUI and Platinator. NefUI started out as a cooldown manager customizer that has grown to also provide customization for unit frames, group frames, and the character panel. It isn't quite as fully featured as ElfUI, but it does tick most of the essential functionality boxes except for nameplates. And for nameplates, for me, it's very much going to be a toss-up between the new Platinator add-on or Plater. Plater will not be as capable as it is currently in the War Within, but it will still for me be a lot better than the default built-in nameplates. But for me, personally, I'm probably heavily leaning towards Platinator, mainly because I find that its set-up user interface is a lot more intuitive and easier to use. Now, I'm going to say that I personally rate the combination of NefUI and Platinator very highly, and I will be quite happily using them even just for a few weeks. But ElfUI does still offer a lot more functionality, and I'm very used to it. So those alternatives for me are going to stay just a contingency option, as I strongly suspect that for the longer term, as soon as ElfUI is up and running, I will be switching back to it. Although I may still keep Platinator around for those nameplates, depending on how well they compare to ElfUI's built-in nameplates once they're updated. Now, if you're not an ElfUI user, the best way to figure out your own personal alternatives to your current user interface is to get on the PTR, which is now running the pre-patch version. I'll link to a setup guide down below. But on that pre-patch, you will be able to try out those add-ons which already have 12.0 support and get them set up in advance. Now, step 4 is a step that I do before the start of every expansion pre-patch, and that's to take some screenshots of my add-on bars. Classes are going through a ton of changes for the Midnight pre-patch, and that inevitably means that even if you're a user of the default user interface, there's a high chance that your action bars will end up being messed up. And having a screenshot of how they used to be just makes it so much easier to recreate them back to exactly how you want them. Now, for step 5, ironically, I'm going to be telling you to add a few extra add-ons, but these are add-ons that are going to help you with the process of managing all of your other add-ons. First up is Bugsack and Bug Grabber. These work in combination to track add-on errors and display them in a convenient user interface. Broken add-ons aren't always obvious, and add-ons that throw a ton of invisible errors can absolutely tank your game's performance, and even in extreme cases cause it to crash. There is a built-in error window, but if you've ever had to use it in anger, you'll know what a pain it is, especially when it pops up in the middle of your screen during an important raid fight. The other add-on I recommend you consider adding is Simple Add-on Manager. This allows you to create saved lists of active and inactive add-ons, which are super useful if you're waiting for an add-on to get an update and are struggling to remember which add-ons are currently safe to enable and which are not. But that's us done with the preparations for patch day, so let's get on to my patch day survival guide. Now, before I go into all of the details, there is something you do need to know. Blizzard has decided to effectively disable the usual ability to load out-of-date add-ons. What this means is that add-ons will not be loadable on the Midnight pre-patch when it goes live until those add-ons are updated to support Midnight, and that will remain the case even if you select the usual option to load out-of-date add-ons. Now, if you don't play on the North American realms, I strongly recommend that you do not update your add-ons until the patch is available in your region. Starting on the Tuesday when the patch drops in North America, add-on creators will be pushing the Midnight updates, and not all of those updates are going to be backwardly compatible. I personally stopped doing any add-on updates on the Monday of that week, but that honestly is probably being a bit overcautious. Now the next step is the exact opposite. On patch day, before you even start up the game, make sure you do update every add-on that you can possibly update. And as you do update your add-ons, do keep a note of which add-ons did get an update and which didn't. The simplest way to do that is to take a quick screenshot or two of your add-on manager. After I've got all those add-ons updated, I recommend that the first time you start the game up, you do it with all your add-ons disabled. Now, I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but it really is a good idea to make sure that the game itself is healthy and is able to run without any add-ons, so that you don't spend a lot of time trying to debug something that turns out not to be add-on related at all. Once you are happy that the game is up and running, that's the time to get back in and enable all of those add-ons that got updated and see where things land. Now this is the time that you want to open up Bugsack and check that none of your add-ons are throwing errors. And if you find any, I'd personally recommend that you disable them until they get a fix. Unless of course it's a very essential add-ons, and even with the errors, you still think that it's usable. Now the next step is to go through all of those important and essential add-ons that didn't get an update on the day and give them a go to see if they work. Now, as I've already mentioned, any add-ons that didn't get updated from Midnight won't load, but it's very likely that some add-ons will get their 12.0 updates well in advance of the pre-patch drop-in. So it may be surprising how many add-ons that didn't get an update on the day will turn out to still work. After you've got all of that done, of course, you'll want to copy in any saved profiles, and then you should be ready to go and off and play the game. But that doesn't mean that we're quite finished yet with the add-on survival guide. It is pretty much always the case that with a new expansion pre-patch, some add-ons just won't be ready in time. So for much of the following week, it is a good idea to keep an eye open for any additional add-on updates. Personally, pretty much any time before I start the game, I check for add-on updates anyway. And during this first week, as those add-on updates come in, I'll be checking to re-enable any disabled add-ons that happen to get an update in that period. Now finally, of course, that does raise one question, and that is, what if the necessary update doesn't arrive? Well, my personal approach in previous expansions is to wait a week or so and then start enabling those add-ons one by one to check if they work anyway. But of course, that's not really going to be possible this time around. So I'll probably wait a month before I'll finally admit the inevitable that that add-on's probably not going to get fixed, and then remove it, and if necessary, look for an alternative. Hopefully this guide will help you prepare for that add-on apocalypse. Although if this all feels a little bit much, I am going to say again that making do with the default user interface on pre-patch day is perfectly viable, and for sure remains the path of least resistance. If you're aware of any other new add-ons that might be good alternatives to any of the major add-ons that are either going away or might not be ready in time, then do let us all know down below in the comments. If you found this style of video helpful, entertaining, or even just plain annoying, then let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me to make more of these videos, along with my other content, then hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. If you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me in social media for updates. My links are in the description below as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.